and welcome to another episode of Classic Cinema Review. I am your host, Mike Blumenberg.
And I'm Chris Wyatt.
And today we're going to take a one-year step forward to 1931. We got a Dracula, or Dracula, as they say in America.
It was directed by Ted Browning and released by Universal Pictures and stars Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula himself.
So after hypnotizing a British soldier into becoming his mindless slave, Dracula travels to London and begins to wreak havoc. When he sets his sights on the daughter of a prominent doctor, vampire hunter Van Helsing is enlisted to put a stop to the Count's never-ending bloodlust. And I gotta say, this movie's pretty good. Bela Lugosi was a huge creepster as Dracula. I liked his performance a lot.
And this is perhaps his most iconic role.
The only role I've known him from.
So the movie is based on the ever-popular horror novel by Bram Stoker, which is considered one of the peaks of Gothic literature.
Now, compared to the movies that we looked at last episode from 1930, the dialogue in all three of these movies that we're going to go into today is dramatically improved. Almost night and day. Still a little rough around the edges. They still drag it out, and it could be edited to be more, rapid fire, fast paced, but as far as dialogue is concerned, it's much better. And I'm telling you, I can't get over the creep factor of Bela Lugosi.
Now, when it comes to this film, it's considered one of the first big films for what's called Universal Monsters. Because when it comes to Universal Studios, it is known for making a lot of classic horror monsters, like Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, Dracula with Bela Lugosi. A year later, Boris Karloff starred as the Mummy, and the other monsters came later, like the Wolfman, Phantom of the Opera.
So you're saying that Dracula kind of kicked all that off?
Yes.
There you go. A little fun fact for you right there.
Yeah, so when it comes to horror films, this may not be as gory as like some movies that like you would used to, like slasher films or any of that. But if anything, it definitely has that creep factor.
Big time. They don't show anything. I thought it ended abruptly. Just sort of, you see them, they got him cornered. You think everything is going to happen, what you think is going to happen, but they don't show anything. Like right when you think he's going to like ram the stake through his heart, nothing.
Spoiler alert.
Well, I guess it's 1931, so they're not going to show like blood splattering all over the place and whatnot, but you could have at least showed used how they did in other movies, like the shadow effect.
Yes.
Which you'll see in our next one, the M coming up. They emphasize on that. It could have been a silhouette of it happening or something. Because this is the climax of the movie, and then credits.
Yes. Now let's talk about the sets. It definitely gives that Gothic feeling to the story.
Yeah.
Seeing Dracula's castle in Transylvania come to life.
And he likes them run down. Like they're all old, like dilapidated castles full of cobwebs and creepy stuff and all that. And even when he travels to London, he specifically wanted that old. They thought he would have to do a lot of renovations to it, but to him it was perfect how it is, all run down and almost like a torturer's pit.
I actually found out on the internet that the same sets were used for a Spanish language version of the film that was made that same year. So basically, this is the American version, and then they did a Spanish version for Spanish people.
That I did not know.
Courtesy of Wikipedia, people.
Just basically refilmed the whole thing in Spanish?
Yes.
Who played Dracula?
I don't know, but I know that it was very popular with the Spanish audiences.
Interesting. Was that a common thing back then or no?
I honestly don't know.
Well, there you go. You learned something here.
Yeah. So,
that's pretty cool.
So let's talk about Bela Lugosi. This is perhaps his most iconic role.
I wouldn't know. This is the only thing I've ever seen of it, so I don't know what his other roles are.
I mean, when it comes to him as Dracula, it has perhaps become the personification of that vampire. I mean, think about all the vampires you've seen in movies. Basically, Bela Lugosi inspired so many different vampire performances. In fact, he actually reprised his role of Dracula later in the 1940s for a horror comedy of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Oh my God.
Considered one of the greatest comedies of all time.
Seriously?
Yeah, it was. The American Film Institute named it as one of the top 100 greatest comedy films.
That sounds like it would just be a disaster trying to mash a couple things like that together. Abbott and Costello with Dracula.
And Frankenstein.
Oh my god! All right.
But when it comes to Bela Lugosi, the American Film Institute did also name his performance as his character as Dracula as one of the top 50 greatest movie villains of all time.
Yeah, I would agree. Had it been set in modern times, it obviously would have shown you a lot more, been more gory and stuff. But for 1931, seriously, this dude is creepy. Like, extremely creepy. When he's talking to people, he's always slowly leaning in and making them uncomfortable.
Plus the shadow effects with the cinematography.
But then he sort of plays it, you expect him, like, oh, he's going to lean in for the kill, but then he'll just, like, sort of drift off and do his own thing. Like, you're always on edge as to whether or not he's about to attack someone or not.
And then when someone has, like, a cross out, he's like...
Some of that stuff was a little cheesy, and when he turns into a bat, terrible. It was comedic how bad that special effect was. Almost like they're intentionally trying to make it funny.
Well, what'd you expect? It's not like they had CGI where they could morph him into a bat.
But it's this huge bat. This wingspan's got to be like 2 feet, and it's just sitting there like bouncing, and you can tell it's like on some type of string, and it's just sort of bouncing, and the wings are flapping, in accordance to it being pulled up and down real fast, and then it just sort of hangs outside of a window, like not even doing anything. Those parts were kind of cheesy and funny, but with actual Bela Lugosi in the scene was awesome. I liked it a lot.
And think about like the costume he had. Like the cape is perhaps so iconic.
Mm-hmm. And then I was confused a bit. Who is Van Helsing? Is that his name? Van is his first name?
Yes. He's supposed to be a vampire hunter or something like that. I know that in the 2000s they did a whole movie of Van Helsing with him hunting vampires.
But anyway, all of a sudden Van Helsing is there and he's on the case, and he knew, like other people didn't believe him when he was saying like, here's what's going on. And then he realized, looking in that, was a music box or something, he realized like Dracula wasn't creating a reflection.
Well, that's the thing. Vampires are not supposed to have reflections in mirrors, according to what the story goes.
And then that's what set him off. And then, of course, he tried to show Dracula the mirror, and he slaps it out of his hand, and he's like, oh, sorry, trying to play it off like, oh, I'm totally not a vampire, I just don't like mirrors. But, yeah, Van Helsing, his character was good, he was sharp, he knew exactly what was going down, and he wasn't buying any of Dracula's nonsense. He was having none of it.
Yeah, and like I said, this was the era of Universal monsters. I mean, next Universal was sprouting up horror films all over the place.
Oh, the studio specifically was doing that?
Yeah, I mean, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Wolfman.
Kind of like what we're seeing today with all the superhero nonsense.
Yeah, well, to each their own.
Yeah.
So overall, let us introduce what we like to call the real rate. We'll rate how good this movie is. And when it comes to Dracula, what would you say this movie is, Mike?
For the time, for 1931, and everything considered, on a scale of 0 to 5 movie reels, I would give it a solid 3.5 reels. No doubt about it. Because again, dialogue got a lot better since 1930, but still a little slow paced, but you're starting to get into it. You're starting to get some good dialogue between characters here, and that creep factor really played in a lot in mine, so 3.5 reels.
Is there anything that could have made it better?
Show him getting stabbed in the heart at the end. That would have given it the 5 reels, because the movie just abruptly ended. Right when you're about to see what you want to happen, it didn't happen. So I got to deduct, at least a reel for that, but other than that, I liked it a lot, honestly.
All right. So with that in mind...
You got to give your reels. You didn't give any reels.
Well, personally, I'd say maybe 4. Bela Lugosi is... like I said, is perhaps his most iconic role. The sets and cinematography give it that gothic feeling. It may not be like scared out of your pants scary, but it does give that creep factor that the story has.
Mm-hmm.
So up next, we're going from Transylvania to Germany to what is considered one of the most important films in German cinema, the movie M, directed by Fritz Lang and created by Nero Films AG.
Now, in this movie, we see a serial killer who preys on children becomes the focus of a massive police manhunt in Berlin. With both cops and criminals in pursuit, the murderer is sent to a tense, panicked attempt to escape justice.
Now, when it comes to this film, I gotta say, when I first saw it, I did not expect it to be that good.
I don't expect any of these to be that good because of the era, but I was pleasantly surprised as well, especially in the dialogue department. This one has blown all of the other movies out of the water as far as dialogue. Rapid paced, good character interaction. Of course, you're reading subtitles, which takes away from it a little bit because you want to be focused on the scenery and you know the acting performances and stuff, but this is light years ahead of the American films that we have previously seen.
And you gotta admit, for a film made in Germany at that time, it's surprising how much better it is than other films of that time.
They seem to know more about making a film than Americans did at the time.
Well, that is because the director, Fritz Lang, is considered one of the most influential directors at that time. A few years earlier, in the 20s, he did what is considered one of the greatest silent films ever, Metropolis.
Never heard of that.
Well, for any silent fan, I recommend it.
Well, there you go, silent heads. Go out there and check it out.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the lead in this movie, Peter Lorre. Now, when it comes to the name, some of you might be familiar with him for playing in like some movies with Humphrey Bogart in the 40s. The Maltese Falcon, his most iconic role in Casablanca, and maybe you also saw some caricatures of him in some old Looney Tunes cartoons.
I thought he was really good. Very expressive in his face, especially his eyes. He could make those bug eyes I open his eyes so wide they're like popping out of your head. So there's several scenes in that movie where he's either like startled or cornered or whatever where you see that, but
yeah.
Ultimately this movie was pretty damn good as well you don't see anything happen again, just like Dracula, you don't see anything actually happening, but through a silhouette you see the kidnapping take place.
And also when it comes to this film, it's known for what is considered a leitmotif, a set of music that helps make people know the character. You know, for example, Jaws, there's that da 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 da. When it comes to M, we know that kids are in danger because Peter Lorre starts whistling in the Hall of the Mountain King.
When he's sort of on the prowl, he's whistling that tune and sort of enticing these children with like balloons and candy and stuff like that. And how he was figured out was probably one of the coolest parts for me. The blind guy,
yeah,
huge. Police were failing miserably. Everyone was on the police's case. You got to catch it. Everyone's terrorized. All these little kids are getting snatched up like on their way.
Their mothers are worried sick for them.
Yeah, and you see one of them. It follows her around for a little bit where she hears the children running up the stairs of the building they live in. Hey, where's my daughter? Oh, we don't know. You know, she's getting panicked and whatnot. And now you're starting to get into the whole plot of the movie. And then you become to know like, okay, Whistle Man is on the prowl and you better hide your children. So now politicians and the city and all the citizens and everything getting really fed up with the police's inability to catch the criminal here. So then the criminals start to organize their own force to try to catch the guy.
Yeah, I mean, the crime bosses, they actually do their own trial with him.
Which was really good. That scene was awesome.
You could just see the fear in Peter Lorre's mind.
Yeah.
The speech that he gives, you can tell that it's kind of like Psycho in a way, because you can actually tell that he has that thing in him that doesn't want to...
It's like he doesn't want to do what he's doing, but he can't stop.
Exactly.
Which is what he said. Like, he's saying that. He's like, it builds inside of me.
And I'm sure that's the thing with, like, a lot of serial killers, even in real life.
Oh, absolutely it is. There's no doubt about that. Because once they caught him, everyone wanted to just kill him immediately. But he's pleading, like, you gotta follow the law. Like, you gotta turn me over to the police. And they're all laughing at him, like, yeah, we're the incompetent police. We're totally gonna hand you over to them. They were gonna do it all of himself. And then his lawyer gave a very impassionate speech as well, which sort of turned the tide, but by then the police had showed up.
Yeah. So overall, when it comes to like the cinematography in this movie, it really gives you that feeling of dread.
It does. It's not like you're on the edge of your seat or you're like terrified that a kidnapper's gonna burst through your door, but I mean, it held my attention. And honestly, like for a lot of these old movies, if My attention is held. There's no reason why everyone else shouldn't find it at least somewhat interesting. So out of the movies we've reviewed so far, this one has been my favorite. Like I said, the best dialogue, starting to get into a lot of the shadow, the silhouette effect and all that stuff
I think it's an artistic form called chiaroscuro when it comes to extreme light and extreme dark images.
That's why you're the expert.
Yeah. Now it's time for our real rate. What would you give M?
This one, I'm giving a good 4, a solid 4. 4 reels,
Me
no
too.
doubt about it.
Me too. 4 reels. And this is definitely a must watch. I mean, it is considered one of the most influential films of world cinema.
Again, for me, having zero background in these super old films, I don't know what to compare it to, but it is good. There's no doubt about it. It's a really good movie.
Yeah, and Peter Lorre's performance is enough to make it a must-watch for anyone.
I would agree with that.
With that said, we're shifting from Germany to Oklahoma in what was the first Western film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. This movie is Cimarron, directed by Wesley Ruggles and released by RKO, starring Richard Dix and Irene Dunne.
In 1889, an adventurous lawyer and newspaper editor convinces his wife to join him in the rush to populate Oklahoma. Over a tumultuous 40 years, the couple are repeatedly separated and reunited as Oklahoma makes its long journey to statehood.
Now, this movie is actually based on a book by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Edna Ferber. Some of you might know her because she was the woman responsible for creating Showboat, which became a very popular Broadway musical. And if any of you have heard the song Old Man River, that's where the musical comes from. With that said, this movie, it is definitely unlike any Western I thought it would be.
Same here. I thought, having grown up watching my dad watch Westerns from the 50s and 60s and stuff.
With cowboys and outlaws and...
But I thought it was going to be the cowboy hero type movie, the white horse, the knight in shining armor.
Basically something like the Lone Ranger.
Yeah, but it was not like that at all.
In fact, this movie it starts with what is called the Oklahoma Land Rush, where people were going out to claim land in the then Oklahoma Territory, and it actually starts with a cast of 5,000 extras.
It did?
Yeah, didn't you notice how big that opening was?
That was 5,000 people?
Yes.
Oh my God. Yeah, they're all making a mad dash, because what was the government giving you? It was you could stake claim to just show up with a flag, pound it into the ground, and now that huge chunk of land was yours. They were giving away 2 million acres or something.
I mean, at the beginning, this takes place at the peak of the Wild West.
Yeah. And they're coming from, where were they, Missouri?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and Missouri was already a state at that time.
This guy sort of just abandons his family, kind of, and then initially comes back, and convinces his wife to go with, which along
with her son.
Yeah, he's coming back to take the family with him, and her mother wanted nothing to do with this. She was totally against it, but he sort of was the adventurous type. He didn't want to just settle down and live a boring life. This was the Wild West, the new frontier, trying to be Lewis and Clark. And he rounded up his family and he went for it.
Now that is a good way of calling it, because when it comes to the lead role played by Richard Dix, you can definitely tell he did a good performance.
Absolutely. And like I said before, this is nothing like the lame cowboy movies from the 50s. He went out there, he was intelligent, talented, very charismatic, good with people, and when the bad guys, there's always got to be the bad guys. I expected things to go a lot different, but honestly, he was having none of their nonsense. He was giving them a chance to, change their lives, basically, telling them, this isn't, what you're doing doesn't make any sense. It's not a good thing to do. You're harassing these people, leave them alone. He gave them the opportunity.
Even when he was giving a sermon, next moment a guy tries to shoot him, bang.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. He gave that guy a couple chances to not be a jerk, and then he disrupts, the people of this town wanted him to start a church thing, so he's like, everyone, Baptist, Catholics, Jew, doesn't matter, we're all here for the same purpose, and and then this troublemaker shows up, starts giving him some grief, and he just shot him down.
And just like that, bang.
Yeah, no, and then everyone's just like, oh, okay, like we don't have that problem anymore. Thanks, buddy.
And then next thing you know, another guy comes in who's actually acquaintance to him, and they start doing a big gunfight.
It was pretty intense. Like this was I thought it was a cool movie like that. Not the stereotypical cowboy and western, like I said, from the 50s and 60s. This was actually kind of a fresh take on it.
Yeah, and when it came to the female lead, Irene Dunne, you can tell that how her character evolves during the movie.
Yeah, because we jump forward, like the synopsis said, like 40 years. So you'll see like a section of the movie will happen, and then it'll show you like, oh, well, we fast forward like 10 years into the future. So the sets are all changed. It's a little more modernized. The
costumes change as well.
Yeah,
it shows that change in both architecture and fashion.
You keep taking these steps forward, which is also really cool. And with no CGI or nothing like that, the amount of time they've had to spend building all of these sets over and over again was amazing.
When it comes to the movie, there are some cons. One big thing, stereotypes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was very uncomfortable parts of this movie to watch.
In the first half alone, there was this one black teenager who basically was a servant to them, and even if he's a teenager, his role was just
very cringy, very uncomfortable. Because he stowed away in their wagon. When they packed up and started heading to Oklahoma, he jumped in the back and hid under some blankets. So of course they're not going to turn around and take him home, so they let him stay. But just the way they had him speaking in that broken, like, dumb English was very uncomfortable to watch.
And even when it came to Irene Dunne's character, she was actually prejudiced against Native Americans, but in the end she learned to accept them since her son actually married one.
Yeah. So by the end of it, the son marries a full-blooded chief's daughter?
Yes.
Which brought the mother around to being accepting of Indian, because I
actually find this very progressive for that era.
Big time. So overall, like, there was plenty of lessons to learn in this, from like the adventurous spirit, taking chances, being able to evolve from what your beliefs may have been, evolving into something that is completely different as the decades go by.
Yeah, I mean, one good example is when Richard Disse's character defends a prostitute.
Yeah. So, like I said, he's a lawyer and a journalist, so he goes out there, he starts his newspaper, which everyone was pretty pumped about.
And his wife is absolutely against him defending the prostitute.
Yeah. But she had every right to be defended, and ultimately, like,
they found her innocent.
Yeah, he gave such an impassionate plea that logic and common sense, you couldn't ignore it. So she had to be acquitted of the charges, which I thought was awesome as well.
I actually find it interesting how this movie actually humanizes some things like...
Yeah, there's no demonization, really, of anyone in this movie.
Aside from the black teenager.
They didn't really demonize him. They just made him the stereotypical, like, dumb guy who can barely speak English.
So overall, when it comes to real rates, what would you give it? Cimarron.
This, it's got to be... I'll go 3.5 reels again.
Me too. 3.5 out of 5.
It was another pretty long movie. Probably could have been chopped down.
It was a little over 2 hours long.
But I liked the progressive nature of it, that the characters could actually learn and evolve. That did a lot for me.
Not just that, but the sets and costumes as well.
Yeah. So all that stuff was great. Again, American films compared to the German film M, not up to snuff on dialogue, although this one was drastically better, like I said, than the 1931s. But still, pretty rough around the edges, and it's not detracting anything from it. 3.5 reels for 1931, I think, is good. We're gonna have to be seriously blown away to hit 5.
Yeah, something tells me that won't be happening for a while.
I'm gonna have to take his word for that, because again, all of these movies, I've never seen any, and you've probably seen quite a few of them.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us. In our next episode, we're going a year ahead to 1932. We'll be traveling to Vietnam, China, and a grand hotel in Berlin that earned the film the Academy Award for Best Picture.
Make sure your passport's up to date, folks, because we are jet-setting around the world. And thank you again for watching.
This is Chris Wyatt.
And I'm Mike Blumenberg.
And thanks for watching Classic Cinema Review.